is not empty. It's great to see most of you here. Now, I do hope, first of all, thank you. Many of you joined us for the cocktail reception yesterday. I hope you had a good chat with each other, made a few new connections. Hopefully that will lead to a few more interesting things that we hopefully will be able to showcase on stage at a future convening. That said, yesterday we spent a lot of time learning from Central Bank of Kenya, the journey in Liberia and in Gambia, and some of the work that's been going on in Bangladesh. We'll stick with that theme a little bit today, this morning, where we will focus on a couple of lessons. We want to hear from what's happening in COMESA with the DRPP project. But we will hear from, I think, Ras, I believe, is in Pakistan. And one of the more quiet sections of our community, but one of the more formidable ones, are those people who spend a lot of their time thinking about the payments ecosystem and how it works and coming up with lessons that we probably would all benefit from. This morning we have two of those sessions. The first one will be led by Olu, key considerations for designing and redesigning the IIPS target operating model. So at this point, I will welcome, I saw Olu here. Yes, there he is.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope I'm very audible. So this is going to be a very interactive session. And basically, it's just to share some insights and experience and also to walk us through how to develop and redesign or refine IPS target operating model. Okay. So before I start, let me give a rundown of myself. I've actually been working in the instant payment space for about 14 years, managing, refining, designing instant payments at a national scale. So I recently joined the foundation, and my work is basically to work with operators and basically the larger IIPS ecosystem more broadly, looking and focusing more around improving performance and also ensuring adherence to recommended best practices, principles, and more importantly, performance metrics. And one of the things we also want to do as a step forward on that is to also help the ecosystem players to build some kind of monitoring solutions and also some sort of efficiency reporting systems. So that would enable us to, be proactive in managing related technological, operational reliability issues and so on and so forth. So that's my background in a nutshell. So this morning I will be speaking about what I call a target operating model. How do we design and refine? I know in the last couple of, let me say since yesterday and throughout this year that we've actually had a lot of discussions using the Mojocom platform. A lot of discussions have actually been ongoing as regards deployment, designing, implementation, post-go live, and so on and so forth. But how do we actually have a kind of ecosystem lens to understand what needs to be designed and also having a focus on the target state? So target state actually encapsulates your technology, what kind of tech stack do you want to have between 2025 and having a kind of projection in the next 5-10 years. Also looking at your operational reliability, what are the kind of implementation, automation, transformation do you also want to have in your day-to-day processes and all that? In terms of governance model, you also like to understand what are the current governance model that are applicable to the state of affairs at this moment and how do we want to see it in the next few years. More importantly, the people. So we also want to understand what are the kind of resources that are available at our disposal at this moment and how do we also want to scale. the resources, as we ramp up volume, as we build new use cases, and so on and so forth. So these are the very key components of what makes a target operating model, and it will be good for us to understand what are the mechanisms to understand the current state and how we will also have a kind of step to achieve that target state. So let me quickly share an experience with you, and this is something that actually happened with me. So I know many of us actually understand or probably were familiar with NIPS in Nigeria. So I was part of the people that designed NIPS NIP in Nigeria back in 2011. And in 2012, I was called to set up a team to look after tech support, tech infrastructure management, operations, dispute resolutions, everything that has at the intersection of tech ops, business, and all that. So it was so intense because, managing an instant payment for about a population of about 150 million back then, and about 80 million banking population, and also having about 48 banking institutions before the consolidation, and have about over 500 microfinance institutions, over 1,000 PSPs, and so on and so forth. So this scenario actually happened to me sometime around 23rd, 24th of December of a particular year. I can't remember the year. And this is just to give you some sort of insight around how people process monitoring actually impacts the entire ecosystem. So we understand that during December period, there's always a ramp up of volume. People want to transact. Everybody's trying to make payment for Christmas and all that. So that very day on the 23rd of December, I was to travel the following morning, 5 a.m. in the morning. For some of us that understand Lagos traffic very well, you want to really, get on the road very early in the morning. So as I was going home at night, a day before my trip, that was around 9 p.m., my executive director just called me. Have you seen an email from GT Bank? And actually, GT Bank is one of the top. So what we do is we look at our top volume drivers, and we have some sort of special interventions or special monitoring for those top, because those top 10 contribute about 99% of the entire ecosystem volume. So my ED just called me, have you seen the email from GT Bank? And anytime this bank actually sends an email of an escalation, there's almost certainty that there's an underlying issue. So I said, no, I have not seen the email. He said, okay, are you driving? I said, yes, I'm driving. He now said, okay, when you get home, is there a possibility for you to check the email? I said, that was back in, I think, 2014 or 2015. I said, I'm out of data. He said, do you mean you can't have access to your email when you get home? You don't have data on your phone? And I said, okay, I'll try to check on it when I get home, sir. So I got home around 10 p.m. And don't forget, I mentioned I was planning to travel very early the next morning. So I got home, I checked the email. When I read the email, I have an idea of what could happen, but I wasn't sure. So I just went to the bathroom, have my shower, and then I called one of my colleagues to call the guys running the 247 service to check what the case is. I was expecting a feedback in maybe within 5-10 minutes. But after 1 hour, I went to the bathroom, had my shower, came back. I was expecting this guy to call me back. He didn't call back, so I had to call him just to understand what exactly the problem was at that time. So his phone was actually busy, saying user busy. So I knew there was something that the guy was trying to troubleshoot with the tech guys that are running the 247 shift. So the guy now called me as I was in conversation with another person from another bank who also escalated similar issue. I knew there was a problem. So at around 12 midnight, that's around 5 minutes to 12 midnight, I have to get up, because at that time, my colleague that I called initially had called me back to explain the detail of the issue. So I got into the car at 5 minutes to 12 midnight, and don't forget I was to travel 5 a.m. in the morning. So I got into my car. As I was driving to the office, we were able to narrow down that issue to a database issue. So as I was driving to the office, as I was driving, I was calling my database guy. Friday evening, the guy was, enjoying himself at the club. And I said, there's an issue, you need to meet me in the office right now. I mean, we had a lot of arguments around that. And of course, that led to something I actually call people disconnection, because we had a lot of arguments, and at some point as I was driving, I have to bring another person on the call as well. So there was a disconnect between, the two of us and and the tech infrastructure guys. I mean, tech people, you understand, when it's a database, you say, no, it's not a database, it's a tech, and it's a network. So we had more of a kind of people, disconnect in there. Now, on getting to the office, we realized that there was an issue, there was a lock on the database. So instead of it to actually be having an incremental value as transactions are writing, there was a lock, it couldn't increment, and transactions could not write at that time. So what happened? There was a process that should have actually been run 2 hours prior to that time, but out of negligence, somehow, the person that was in charge of our monitoring systems, I think the guy fell ill, didn't actually do proper handover, and assumed he's going to be coming back, to continue his monitoring activity. But unfortunately, that issue actually crystallized before he came back. So that led us to what we call tech performance monitoring failure. So it's a monitoring failure as a service. Now, looking at that, because of that failure on the monitoring side, led to a process failure, which also impacts another chain of processing. Now, as those transactions were not writing, and that particular service actually very, very instrumental to settlement, to a whole lot of things in the ecosystem, the implication is we had what we call a service failure across the ecosystem. So that little failure in monitoring and process failure within our institution actually impacted the entire ecosystem. And what happened? The next day, in fact, to cut the story short, I couldn't travel on that Saturday again. I couldn't travel. I have to cancel my trip because I was in the office till the noon of the next day to resolve the issue. So now that created more of a kind of ecosystem challenge, and before we could resolve that issue, it took us almost 18 hours. Now, for you to see, just to explain to you the connection between the people, the monitoring, the process, and what the impact is in the entire ecosystem view. So as we're designing our platforms, as we are designing our processes, we need to actually understand and have in mindset as part of our design thinking that we should also impute and also involve the ecosystem lens in whatever we are also bringing up. Now, what do we mean by target operating model? Target operating model is actually a term which can actually be used in various ways. Some people can actually term it more of a kind of, a framework where you can put in your tech, processes, operations, people, governance, and have a kind of analysis or do a kind of gap analysis on it to be able to understand areas of improvement and also understand what are the mechanisms you need to put in place to achieve the target state. And that's why we actually call it a target operating model. So it's also good as we are designing, as we are implementing, to also have more of a kind of focused lens on where do we want to be. I know a lot of people will actually want to have day one delivery, more of a kind of one use case, probably P2P, which is the most common. Now, as we are implementing to have a day one delivery for P2P, what do we envisage in the next months or years? What are the kind of use cases we also want to build? So that as at the time you're having your design, discussions, you are having your, design implementation discussions, you actually have those future functionalities or capabilities also in sight to be part of your, development work. Now, from a strategic standpoint, target operating model can also help us to achieve our strategic vision and objective across our organization. So it's also a mechanism you can actually use to understand the future state and do more of a kind of gap analysis of the current state and the future state of what you want to achieve, and create steps or create mechanisms. I know a lot of CTOs, CIOs will tell you, I want to have medium-term strategy, long-term strategy. These are the projected expenditures. These are the forecasts that I need to put in place. The same thing is also applicable when we are looking at our tech, ops. Everybody is actually talking about automation, AI, and all that. The question is, what are the dependencies for us to also automate or transform a lot of internal processes? So these are some of the things that we need to put into the design concept when we are looking at how to achieve our target operating model. Now, very quickly, why is this very important? As you could see, instant payments it's actually ramping up globally. And it's projected that by 2030, that is really going to constitute about 90% of retail payment. So it's very, very important to also have a kind of trajectory to understand in our various jurisdictions, various countries, what kind of volume projection do we see? What kind of use cases do we foresee to actually put in on top of our, day one delivery or existing infrastructure that we've actually provided? Now, what are the design considerations I'll quickly, speak about? Number one, focus on interoperability. I know for a lot of CIOs or CTOs, one of your KPI is actually to reduce TCO, or probably reduce costs. Every CEO wants the CIO or CTO to reduce costs, but they also want improved high efficiency. So how do you create a balance around that? And one of the key anchor piece of the foundation objective is actually to promote inclusivity and interoperability. And one of the things I always tell the DFSPs or probably ecosystem partners is interoperability actually allows you to reduce your cost significantly because it also eliminates a lot of bilaterals, not just bilaterals in terms of agreement, but in terms of your connection. Rather than for you to connect to 10 institutions, just have a single connection, to the central switch. And of course, the 247 digital economy, like what I always tell a lot of people, the merchant of ago, they are not actually the merchant of today. Every merchant actually wants a very high velocity of funds into their payment, into their, stock value or, bank account at any time. So one of the things also, when you're designing your P2M and all that, you also have to have, the mind of the merchant. How quickly will merchants wants to actually get funds in their bank account? Gone are the days that you do your T+1, T+2. A lot of merchants are not subscribing to those kind of, model any longer. So these are some of the considerations we need to also put in place to ensure that as we focus more on interoperability, we also try to achieve, an infrastructure or a process that could also power a 247 economy. Now, increasing regulatory compliance requirement. This is now becoming a very, big deal in the ecosystem, especially for some of us playing within the cross-border space. We have, FATF regulation that is actually coming on now. Across our jurisdictions, I know our central bank and various institutions also mandating a lot of things which actually evolves around regulation and compliance. So, this is very, very key. And also with the advent of ISO 222, which also carries, a lot of data, a lot of regulators are also demanding and making high demand of high level of requirements in terms of regulation and also in terms of compliance. So it's also good as you're designing, as you're building, you also put in perspective some of the upcoming regulatory requirements or compliance requirements and how you can also funnel in those data points or data sources to be able to meet all these reg and compliance requirements. Now, payment platform modernization, this is very key. Like I always tell people, if you're going to be playing in instant payment space, you need to ensure you have a modernized, not legacy systems, because these are systems that actually is expected to respond in split second. So from the time a consumer is initiating a transaction to when its value is delivered on the recipient side, we are saying in some countries we're saying in 10 seconds, in some countries we're saying in 60 seconds, in some we're saying 30 seconds. But more broadly, we are looking at it from an instant payment standpoint. So most of our back-end systems were actually built for batch processing, ACH, RTGS that has a cutoff time and all that. So we also need to understand what are requirements to modernize our payment platform. Not IIPS, module alone, but we also need to understand everything that encapsulates performance in terms of infrastructure modernization to ensure resiliency, security, and affordability and safety, as the case may be. Now, one of the design consideration is also what I call combinational information. I think there's a guy that actually used this terminology a few weeks ago. I call him Balu. He works with the World Bank. And when he was trying to describe how UPI has facilitated combinational information, so I find it so fascinating. So I've started using the word combinational information. Now, what am I saying here? This also allows us to also think and build overlay capability. So as we're building and rolling out our instant payment platform, we also have to have a lens of inclusivity and also understand what are the new capabilities and functionalities that will come on top of this in the next couple of months or years. So having this as part of our design phase, or probably design phase, it's also going to help to ensure that as we are layering those overlay capabilities and functionalities, it will help us to just seamlessly deploy. Now, for every IIPS ecosystem, I always encourage what I call co-opetition. So that means you are providing a platform to foster collaboration and also encourage competition. A lot of times, I know we've been discussing during the L1 workshop on Monday, we discussed extensively around pricing, economic model, and all that. And one of our principle is also for non-for-loss economic model. But a lot of times, see consumers taking a decision on how a significant shift in your economic model, a significant shift in pricing, and a significant shift in adoption. So it's also good for us to also have that lens of competition as we continue to collaborate with different DFSPs or institutions within our ecosystem. We should also understand what are the key drivers that will enable competition. As a matter of fact, I always tell people, once you are able to deliver value to a client, you deliver value, you deliver instant value, which other institutions cannot get, and it is differentiated. Customers or clients will continue to patronize those services, and that significantly will not impact on how we now cascade the volume or probably the price down to zero. Sustainable economic model and the race against cash. Now, one of the things I think the foundation have also been proposing is, if we look globally, instant payment is actually the only rail that really competes against cash because it delivers instant value, and that is one of the reasons why it's very important for us to also understand how we can drive a sustainable economic model within the ecosystem. And it's very, very important to have this as one of our cardinal objectives as well. Fast-paced demand for identity payments and real-time services. Now, we are already seeing, I was reading an article this morning about after interoperability, what next? We've achieved interoperability and all that. So what next after interoperability? So one of the things we've also seen in some years to come is how do we use digital identity without account numbers and all that, just digital identity to not just to make transfers but probably to facilitate a whole lot of instant payment services at different terminals. So today I should be able to actually go to my ATM and use just my finger to implement, to initiate and authenticate an instant payment. And also I should be able to actually use my digital ID to authenticate or probably initiate an instant payment. So we're already seeing that propelling. So how ready is our platforms, our infrastructures being able, to be able to adhere to or probably conform to some of these design considerations? And it's also good for us to have more of a kind of self-evaluation to see if this could also be a kind of self-assessment to understand what our future state is also going to be. Like I mentioned earlier on around real-time services, if you look at times when I was in a meeting yesterday, and one of the testimonies that actually came up from one of our newly deployed modular country is because the government was actually looking at ways to pay public servants instantly. So at the push of the button, when the authentication, authorization, approval is being done, how can people get funds immediately? So this was one of the key achievement that country actually achieved after so many years of trying, and they couldn't achieve that. So these are some of the things we're seeing. We are already seeing demands for instant services, instant value delivery, which is also expected to to drive us into a real-time economy. Now, let's quickly look at what I term an inclusive instant payment system operating model. Now, one of the things I've also been advocating for, and is also part of what we've also been sharing, is we need to ensure that in our conversations, in our design principles, we also have what I call an ecosystem lens into it. So whenever we are designing or implementing, we should try as much as possible to ensure that we have what we call a kind of ecosystem lens. So what are the aspirations of an ecosystem that is expected to actually achieve a target operating model? So we are seeing a vision has been, formulated. We understand what the mission is. We've developed a strategy to execute on a both short and medium and long-term basis. But how do we bring together those key important factors of your tech platform, tech infrastructure, your internal processes, and most importantly, your people, and of course, the governance structure that is there. And a lot of times, a lot of people actually don't speak so much around the governance. And the governance is very, very critical, to drive adoption, to drive usage, to drive implementation and all that. And also, if you look at the people, which we should not neglect because they are extremely important, how do we ensure that the kind of resources, people resources we have today, what are the capacity building plans or upskilling plans that we need to put in place to ensure that they're able to meet up with the demands of the future? And of course, what are the expectations of the ecosystem players, both individuals, SMEs, business organizations? What are we expecting? What are the expectations from having a kind of robust and resilient IIPS? These are some of the expectations. So how do we ensure the implementation principles? The first one is we are expected to actually build a comprehensive ecosystem commitment to transition to the future state. So not just the IIPS operators alone. So as you're designing your target state operating model, you need to put in place a kind of ecosystem lens. So whatever your transitioning you're doing, you need to bring in the DFSPs, all the connecting institutions, and ensure that you have a trajectory of achieving a target state. I was sharing something with some of our colleagues during the cocktail yesterday, that a lot of times, if IIPS operators actually achieve maximum efficiency and you leave behind all the DFSPs without achieving that same level of capability or functionality, definitely is really going to throw down all those efforts, into the drain. So it's also important as IIPS operators, as regulators, as we are looking at a future state, we try to bring along all the ecosystem players. So as you're improving your technology, ensure that all connecting partners also have the same visibility, or also have the same plans. As volumes are ramping up, as more demands for new use cases are coming up, you also have a lens across all these factors to ensure that we have an ecosystem that is future ready. And the second point is ensuring design architecture reflects sustainability and long-term success. So as you're designing, right at the design phase, we need to also have a future state blueprint in place. I mean, what are the number of resources we need to actually have by the time volume moves from 1 million transactions per day to 20 million transactions on a daily basis? I always make a joke of this. When I was at IIPS, back in 2011, 2012, I think the volume of transactions was about 20,000, 30,000 transactions per day, lesser issues. But by the time we ramp up to about 20 million transactions per day, I couldn't sleep. Because it's the more you have volume of transactions, the more you have ecosystem joining, you have more players joining the ecosystem, the more escalations, the more issues to resolve. So all these things actually, flows along. So as you're building your capability in terms of ramping up, you need to also understand what are the processes, what are the possible escalations that could actually crystallize, what are the, people resources you need to, bring on board, and so on and so forth. Now, most importantly, how do you also scale your infrastructure, which is very, very important. As you're building instant payment of value for financial inclusion, now we are moving to a phase of life that everybody actually wants instant value. So just look at a bit of, handing a cash to someone. That's instant value. Today, we are seeing models whereby even the farmers in the rural areas want instant value delivery at any point in time. So we need to actually put that as a very critical, point. So how do we mature a target operating model, governance, and administration? So 3 key things, which I've tried to put together, and I've also tried to stress one of it as part of our focus area at the foundation. So the first is actually evaluate. I mean, it's also good to do more of a kind of periodic assessment, understanding your performance threshold, understanding what you project to achieve. I was in a situation with my boss a few weeks ago, and we're saying, how do we recommend a 99.99% availability? So we did a simulation to look at 99.99% availability means you're going to be down, I think, about 2 days in a year. We try to put it at 99.98. That implies you're going to be down for maybe 80 minutes in a year. So, these are metrics that you can actually toggle, at different point in time. But it's also important to understand the impact of an IPS not down for 10 minutes in an economy. So that can actually be catastrophic. But in another economy, an IPS can be down in one day. It won't move the needle. The central bank will not be worried and all that. So it's not one size fits all, but we actually recommend the best practice based on international standards. And we also recommend that you actually, incorporate a performance and service quality improvement strategy. So one of the things we are going to be doing at the foundation in the next couple of months, and we are going to be interacting and engaging with you guys, is one, we are going to be working on some, best practices, principles, standards, which we can actually co-develop with all of you, and also share, and also try to do some sort of benchmarking around across, different jurisdictions, and to ensure that we have a kind of blueprint or, playbook that could help us to achieve the target state, performance. Now, the second point is actually refine. Of course, all the strategy or vision or mission or the processes and people and everything I've actually mentioned in the framework, they are not going to be static. Because number one, your regulation is going to be, changing or evolving. New technologies will be coming into play. There will be dynamic requests from the consumers. The economic model within each country or within each jurisdiction or continent to, evolve over time. So you need to actually keep refining as all these things, new entrants, new competition will keep coming in. So it's also good to actually have what I call a refined process, promoting competition, which is collaboration and competition and sustainable economic model, and of course, a continuous improvement culture. Continuous improvement culture is extremely important because it allows you, to understand, do more of a kind of self-evaluation, assess your current state, and be able to actually determine and benchmark against, expected results or outcomes. Now, sustain. This is one of the critical, piece that a lot of people are actually missing out. And why this is important is, number one, we need to keep investing in our people. People are extremely important to drive everything we've been discussing around design, implementation, and so on and so forth. And of course, process re-engineering. I remember very well when I got to my previous days, and I was having an engagement with few banking partners. Now, one of their key problems is around settlement and reconciliation. It's not even tech issues. One of the key problems they had was actually settlement and reconciliation. And it took us about 2 days, to identify what the problem is. And it was just one thing that we did to resolve that issue. When we are redesigning the new instant payment, then we ensure we have a unique end-to-end ID. Previously, what we normally do is at every stage of those transactions, we have a unique ID. So by the time the full stream of message get to the banks, they have about 3 IDs. So it's so difficult for them to understand which of the IDs they would tie to the initial request or the final response. So just changing something in the message that we send to them actually help them to resolve settlement and reconciliation issue. So what am I saying in essence is there are a lot of re-engineering activity that needs to go into our processes. And a lot of time, banks today, DFSPs today, they automate their back end, which free up time for you to do more things like customer engagement, deep diving on how you can actually improve your process and all that. Now, technology innovations and digital transformation, this is extremely important as well. Like I mentioned, all operators or all players within the IIPS ecosystem, we need to adopt what I call a proactive approach to issues. Not being reactive, we need to actually adopt what I call a proactive approach. Because once we adopt a proactive approach and we set up alerts, email systems, and based on threshold and all that, which is also part of our focus work, which we are going to be working with you guys soon, is to ensure that we incorporate some sort of sustainability and ensuring that we have long-term success in whatever we implement and do. So these are the 3 key considerations that we can also adopt to mature our target operating model, governance and administration. Now, there's something I always say, for my expertise and over many years of experience. I always tell people real-time payments is not for the faint-hearted. You know, it's not something that we actually say at 4 o'clock. I was having a discussion with one of our colleagues yesterday, and he mentioned most of the instant payments in that country happens between morning and at 4 p.m. But the remaining, that's about 90%. That's about 98%. The remaining 2% happens after 4. So the question is, what happened to that 2%? So the same energy, the same investment that we have for the 98 is what we should also devote for the 2. Because those 2%, number one, can actually be of significant volume, might be of significant impact, and of course, they can also create some sort of client or customer dissatisfaction. So the same energy investment you've actually invested and put for the 98% from money to 4, you need to also invest in that same resources that will also carry those monitoring, and all that from that 4 p.m. to the next day. So I always tell people and operators, you should be ready to be called at the middle of the night to resolve issues. You should be able to create a people structure. And I don't want to say system structure. People structure, have some team that running 24/7 shift and all that. And also create a long playbook where your team can actually use to resolve L1, L2, L3 related issues as the case may be. So I always say real-time payments brings real-time problems. And once we have real-time problems, it requires real-time intervention. So it's not going to be a deferred intervention. It's not going to be, I have an issue today, oh, don't worry, I will resolve it tomorrow. No, it has to be resolved now. And that is why we call it instant or real-time. So it's something I actually tell a lot of IPS operators, especially for some of our central bank colleagues here that want to also be implementing instant payment. I think this is a very key takeaway for you. You need to understand implementing real-time payment platforms for us to be able to actually achieve that broader objective brings real-time problems. Fraud happens in real time. And when frauds are happening, you get people calling, oh, money has left my account. I need to notify the receiving institution. There must be a lien. And so different issues can actually crystallize. So it requires a real-time solution or real-time intervention. And this also gives a kind of spectrum of the kind of people, service structure, process structure we also need to put in place. And in closing, when we are looking at IIPS, it's actually a mission-critical infrastructure. I mean, these are actually defined by BIS, CPMI, and all that. It's a mission-critical infrastructure. As a matter of fact, some countries actually make it to be a national critical infrastructure. BIS also defines such as systematically important infrastructure. So we'll see it from that perspective, and resolving issues around it and improving the target operating model also requires everyone within that ecosystem, not just the IPS operator, everyone, even including the users, because there are a lot of sensitization, awareness, and all that we also need to do, to the consumer. So let's take a lens from the consumer to the, to the DFSP, the IPS operators, all the way back to the consumer. Needs to be part of that ecosystem lens, to achieve our target model. Thank you, and probably we can take some questions.
Thanks, Sulu. We have time for one question. Any? Sorry. Yeah.
So I don't actually have a question, but I just want to say thank you very much, because it's the first time I've heard somebody speak any sense about what it means to make these systems live. Thank you very much.